It had been a quiet Thursday when my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "Can you do us a favor, honey? Your sister's in a bit of a bind. She needs somewhere to stay for a while. We thought you might be able to help." I stared at the screen, the familiar feeling of dread creeping up my spine. It had been months since I had heard from my sister, Carla. We had always been close, but life had a way of pulling people apart. And when she started drifting away, falling into one mess after another, I had drawn a line. No more rescuing. But the message wasn't unexpected. Carla was a tornado, chaotic, unpredictable, always needing something. She'd been in and out of different living situations the past few years. Every time she landed on her feet, it was only a matter of time before the next storm hit. "Just for a few weeks," my mom promised. "She's really sorry for everything, and she knows it's not ideal, but she's in a tough spot." I sighed, glancing at the apartment I'd worked so hard to afford. It was mine, finally, a space I could call my own after years of living in small, cramped places. I'd saved for this, and I loved it. But now, my sister would be here. For how long? Who knew? I typed back, trying to hide the mix of frustration and guilt in my reply. "Fine, she can stay for a bit. Just don't make it a habit." A week later, Carla showed up with her bags, more like duffel bags, the kind she always had when she moved from place to place. I opened the door, forcing a smile. "Hey, welcome," I said, stepping aside to let her in. I had to admit, there was a part of me that still missed her presence, despite everything. The laughter, the late-night talks, even the arguments. It had been years since we had lived together under one roof. Carla smiled, but I could see the tension in her face, the way she avoided eye contact, as if she knew this wasn't a simple, "come stay for a while" kind of situation. "I'm really grateful, she said, looking around at the space I'd worked so hard for. Her eyes lingered on the furniture, the bookshelves, the cozy little kitchen. She always had a way of making everything feel temporary, as if she wasn't sure if she belonged anywhere. "I know," I said, swallowing the words I wanted to say. "Just, let's keep this simple, okay?" She nodded quickly, her gaze moving to the couch. "I'll just crash here for now, thanks again." I watched her unpack, an uncomfortable silence settling between us. As much as I loved her, I knew how this would go. A few weeks would turn into months, and then it would be hard to ask her to leave. But right now, I didn't have the heart to tell her to go. What I didn't expect was how quickly everything would spiral out of control. The first few days were manageable. Carla kept to herself, trying to adjust to the rules of the house. She'd ask about little things, how to use the coffee maker, where the Wi-Fi password was, how the shower worked. It felt like any typical guest situation, and I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. But then, things began to shift. Slowly at first, then all at once. It started with the dishes. I'd come home from work, tired but satisfied after a long day at the office, only to find the kitchen in disarray. Dirty plates stacked high, half-eaten sandwiches left on the counter, coffee mugs that had been used but not washed. At first, I said nothing. Maybe she was just settling in, I reasoned. It wasn't a huge deal, but it became a pattern. And then it was the laundry. Clothes left in the dryer for days, towels piled up on the floor of the bathroom. It wasn't just the mess, though. It was the assumption that I would clean it up. By the end of the second week, my patience was running thin. I was used to living on my own, managing everything without anyone else in the space. Suddenly, I was constantly picking up after Carla, as if I were her personal maid. Finally, I confronted her one evening. She had left a pile of takeout containers on the dining table, a habit I'd noticed more and more often. I could feel the words bubbling in my throat, ready to spill over. "Carla, we need to talk." She looked up from her phone, distracted. "About what?" I gestured to the mess. "This. You've been here for almost 2 weeks, and I've asked you several times to keep things tidy. I've got my own work to do, and I can't spend every evening cleaning up after you." Carla frowned, her eyes narrowing defensively. "I've been busy, okay? It's not like I'm here just lounging around. I get it. But this isn't how it works. I'm not running a hotel." The words hung in the air. Carla opened her mouth as if to argue, but stopped herself. "Fine, I'll clean up tomorrow," she muttered, getting up to grab her things and retreat to her room. I watched her go, a knot forming in my stomach. We had always been close, But moments like these, where she took everything for granted, made me feel like a stranger in my own house. The following week was no better. The mess continued, along with a creeping sense that Carla had stopped treating my home like it was mine. She'd invite friends over, sometimes without asking, and I'd come home to find strangers lounging around my living room, eating my food, using my things. It wasn't that I didn't want her to have company, but there was a limit. The lines were becoming blurrier, and it felt like the rules I had tried to set were being ignored. I was no longer just frustrated. I was resentful. Resentful that she was here without contributing in any way. Resentful that my space, my sanctuary, was being taken over. And most of all, resentful that I couldn't seem to enforce any boundaries. Every time I tried to talk to her about it, the conversation would end with an awkward apology. But nothing would change. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, the phone buzzed again. It was a message from my mom. "I know it's been tough with Carla there, but I think you should hear us out. We've been talking, and we feel it's time for Carla to contribute a little more. Your dad and I think it's only fair that she pays rent. Just a small amount, nothing too much. It's just for her peace of mind, you know. What do you think?" The words felt like a punch in the gut. Rent. I had been trying to make this work, to be the good sibling, but now my parents wanted her to pay rent. To me, it didn't sit right with me. Carla was my sister. I didn't want her to feel like a tenant, not in my home. I understood the need for responsibility, but this felt like a betrayal. It wasn't just that my parents were suggesting it. It was that they expected me to accept it without question. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. What could I say? What was I supposed to say? How could I explain how uncomfortable this whole situation was becoming? I took a deep breath and typed back. "Fine, I'll talk to Carla. But this is getting out of hand." The next morning, I found myself standing in front of Carla's door, my hand hovering over the knob. I didn't know how to approach her. A part of me wanted to be gentle, to remind her that this was still family and that I wasn't trying to make her feel like an outsider. But another part of me, the part that had been cleaning up after her, making excuses for her and swallowing my frustration for weeks, was itching to finally let it all out. I knocked softly, my voice steady when she answered. "Can we talk for a minute?" Carla didn't look surprised, just tired, as if she had known this moment was coming. She stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. Her room was messy, no shock there, but this time, I couldn't ignore the fact that she was living in my space, contributing nothing and slowly wearing down the last of my patience. I sat on the edge of her bed, trying to choose my words carefully. "Mom and Dad called this morning. They think it's time for you to start paying rent while you're staying here." Carla's eyebrows shot up, but she quickly masked her surprise with a shrug. "Okay, but I'm not sure how much I can afford. I don't have a steady income right now." "I know, and I wasn't planning to charge you either. But they want you to contribute. They think it'll help you take responsibility. So, we need to figure this out." I paused, studying her reaction. "Look, Carla, I've been trying to make this work. But the mess, the constant noise, the people you bring over, it's becoming too much. This isn't what I imagined when we talked about you staying here. You're not a guest, and it's starting to feel like you're taking advantage of me." She folded her arms, a defensive posture I knew all too well. "I'm not taking advantage of you, okay? I'm just trying to get my life together. You have no idea how hard it's been. It's not like I'm trying to ruin everything for you. I don't want to be a burden." Her words hit harder than I expected, and I could feel a stab of guilt. I knew her life hadn't been easy, but at the same time, I wasn't her parent. I was her sibling. And it felt wrong to keep acting like a safety net every time she couldn't land on her feet. "Carla, I'm not trying to make things harder for you, but you can't keep living here like it's a free ride. You have to respect my space and the boundaries I'm trying to set." She shifted uncomfortably, looking away for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice quieter now. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't realize it was affecting you this much. I'll try harder, I swear." But the apology felt hollow, like it always did. It was the same cycle. She'd promised to change, and I'd give her another chance. But deep down, I knew nothing would shift. Not unless something big happened to make her take things seriously. The next few days passed without much incident, but I knew things were bubbling under the surface. Carla was trying to be more responsible, but there was an unspoken tension between us now. Every time she left a dish in the sink or invited a friend over without asking, I would feel a small crack form in the growing rift between us. One evening, I came home to find a note on the counter. It was from Carla, written in her usual hurried scrawl. "Sorry, I'm going out with some friends tonight. Hope that's okay." I stared at the note for a moment, then glanced at the living room. The couch, where I spent most of my evenings unwinding after a long day, was covered with pillows and blankets. It didn't feel like my space anymore. It felt like a place I was visiting, not the home I'd built. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the mess or the rent or Carla's inability to settle down. It was about control, my control over my life, my space, and my future. I had sacrificed so much to get here, and now it felt like I was losing it. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about how I had always been the responsible one, the one who had everything figured out. Carla was the free spirit, the one who never seemed to have a plan, always relying on others to fix things for her. And yet, here I was, stuck in a situation I hadn't planned for. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and texted my mom. I talked to Carla. She says she'll try harder, but honestly, I'm not sure it's enough. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. The message was sent, and I waited for a response. I wasn't expecting much, just an acknowledgement. Maybe some words of comfort, but instead, my mom replied almost instantly. "Don't be too hard on her. She's been through a lot. Just give her some time. Maybe you could talk to her about paying rent. It might make things easier for both of you." I sat up in bed, my frustration rising once again. Rent. The idea of Carla paying me rent still didn't sit right. I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't prepared for the way my family, my own parents, were so willing to turn a blind eye to the strain this was putting on me. The next few days felt like I was walking through mud, each step heavier than the last. Carla had made some effort to tidy up, but the damage had already been done. The mess, the unspoken resentment, and the tension between us were all lingering in the air. I was no longer just frustrated. I was at a breaking point. The following Saturday, Carla and I were sitting in the living room, quietly sipping coffee. She was trying, really trying, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. The awkward silence between us had become deafening. Finally, she put down her mug and broke the silence. "So, about the rent," she began, clearly hesitant. I wasn't sure how to respond. I had been expecting this conversation, but hearing her bring it up made it feel all too real. I didn't want to be the one to say it first, but here we were. "Yeah, Mom and Dad brought it up," I said, setting my coffee cup down. "Honestly, I didn't think it was going to go this way, but I can't keep doing everything for you, Carla. The dishes, the constant stream of people, and now, the rent. It's too much. You can't just stay here indefinitely." Carla shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting to the side. She had a way of avoiding confrontation, of pretending like things didn't bother her until they got out of hand. But I wasn't letting her off the hook this time. "I get it," she said quietly, looking down at her hands. "I'm sorry, I didn't think it would turn into such a big deal." "It's not just the mess, Carla," I replied, my voice steady but tinged with frustration. "It's everything. You can't just come in here and expect to be treated like a guest forever. It's my home, and I've been more than accommodating." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "I know, and I've been thinking about that. I don't want to be a burden, so I'll pay rent. I'll help out more, whatever you need me to do." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I wasn't expecting her to just accept it, but it was the way she said it, so casually, as if it was the easiest thing in the world to just throw money at the situation and make everything better. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what she had said. "It's not about the money, Carla. You can't just throw rent at me and think everything is going to be fine. You need to respect my space, my time. I'm not running a hotel." She raised an eyebrow. "Well, if I'm paying rent, shouldn't I be able to do what I want with the place? Isn't that how it works?" I blinked, taken aback by her response. "That's not how it works, and you know it. Rent doesn't come with permission to leave a mess everywhere or bring whoever you want into my house. This is not your place to do whatever you want." Carla looked like she was about to protest, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the look in my eyes, the exhaustion in my voice. Or maybe deep down, she knew I was right. I thought it would help me, she said, her voice softening. I thought paying rent would make me feel like I'm contributing, like I'm pulling my weight for once. I could hear the frustration in her words, the guilt creeping in, but also the deflection. She was still blaming everyone else for the situation she had found herself in. I'm not asking you to contribute just for the sake of it, I said. I'm asking you to respect this space, to respect me. This isn't just about rent. It's about understanding boundaries. She nodded again, though I could see the discomfort on her face. It was like she wanted to believe it, wanted to understand, but was still wrapped up in her own world. And that was the problem. She wasn't ready to change. That evening, I sent a message to my mom, telling her about the conversation. Mom, I talked to Carla. She says she's willing to pay rent, but it's not just about the money. I need her to understand that it's about respect. Respect for my space, for my time. It's been tough for me, and I'm not sure what to do next. My mom responded almost immediately. I know it's hard. Just keep the peace, okay? Your family. Try not to let it get worse. Try not to let it get worse. Those words echoed in my mind as I sat on the couch later that night, staring at the empty space around me. I had tried to keep the peace for so long, but it was becoming clear that peace didn't come without compromise. And the compromise was starting to cost me my space, my comfort, and my peace of mind. It didn't take long before I realized that Carla's offer to pay rent was nothing more than a temporary fix to a much bigger problem. She didn't understand the gravity of what was happening, how this living arrangement was affecting both of us, how it was fraying the edges of our relationship. By the time the next week rolled around, I was worn out. The tension had only grown, and now the rent conversation wasn't even the main issue. It was everything else, the constant mess, the overcrowding, the sense that my space wasn't really mine anymore. Each time I walked into my own home, it felt more like I was visiting a place that didn't belong to me. Carla had put her mark on every corner, every surface. One evening, I returned from work to find the front door slightly ajar, the unmistakable hum of music leaking out from the living room. I sighed, knowing exactly what I was about to walk into. When I entered, there they were, Carla and her friends, sprawled across the couch, laughing too loudly, sipping wine from glasses that didn't belong to them. Their shoes kicked off carelessly on the floor. The house was already chaotic, and I could feel my patience thinning. Carla, I called out, trying to keep my tone neutral, though I could feel the anger rising. She turned, her face lighting up at first before she noticed the irritation in my expression. Hey, you're home early. Yeah, I'm home early, I said, trying to keep my composure. I thought we talked about this. You can't just invite people over without checking with me first. Carla shrugged, the same casual look on her face that I had come to know too well. It's just a few friends. You're not using the living room anyway. What's the big deal? The big deal is this is my space, I snapped. You can't keep acting like it's a free-for-all just because I let you stay here. This is my home, not a party venue. You're not paying rent for a reason, Carla. It's not about the money, it's about respect. Her expression hardened, and I could feel the shift in the room. The usual deflection wasn't working anymore. This time, I wasn't backing down. I get it, she said, standing up, her voice tinged with frustration. I'm sorry, okay? I thought we were past all this. You asked me to stay here, and I did. But now it feels like I'm walking on eggshells every time I step into this place. You are walking on eggshells, I shot back, not caring about keeping my voice in check anymore. Because this isn't working, Carla. I didn't ask you to come live here indefinitely. I told you it would be temporary, but here we are, and nothing has changed. You've got to start taking responsibility for yourself, and not expect me to pick up the slack every time you mess up. The room went silent. Her friends exchanged uncomfortable glances, but I didn't care. I was done pretending. I had been patient. I had been understanding, but it was clear now that this situation wasn't going to fix itself. Carla looked at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. Fine, she said, her voice low. I'll leave. If it's such a problem for you, I'll just go back to Mom and Dad's. I blinked, surprised by her words. You don't need to leave. I just want you to understand. No, I'll go, she interrupted, cutting me off. If I'm such a burden, then I'll just go. She grabbed her things without another word, walking toward the door, and I stood frozen. I didn't know whether to be relieved or devastated. Part of me knew she was right. This arrangement wasn't working for either of us. But another part of me hated the thought of her leaving, of things getting worse between us. I heard the door slam as Carla walked out, and the weight of the silence settled over the house like a heavy blanket. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the space where she had been, the harsh words we exchanged still echoing in my mind. I had been angry, yes, but deep down, I knew I was also hurt. I wasn't just frustrated with her. I was disappointed in myself for letting it get this far. The next few hours were a blur. My mind raced with thoughts of the confrontation, the aftermath, and what this meant for the future. Had I made the right choice? Was I wrong for expecting her to respect my boundaries? I wasn't sure anymore. Around midnight, I received a message. It was from Carla. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to storm out like that. I'll figure things out. I just didn't know how to make things right with you." I stared at the message for a long time, the words hitting me harder than I expected. I wanted to respond, to explain how I felt, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I put the phone down and sat in the silence of my empty house, wondering if this was the beginning of the end for us, or just the start of a new chapter, one where we would both learn how to navigate the complicated boundaries between family, space, and respect. The next few days were tense, filled with unspoken words and awkward silences. I didn't hear from Carla, and though part of me hoped that maybe we could just pretend it hadn't happened, I knew that wasn't an option. The reality of the situation settled in deeper than I had expected. I had spent the last few days trying to focus on work, distracting myself with emails, deadlines, and meetings. But the problem at home loomed over me, every thought clouded by the unanswered message from Carla and the growing distance between us. I kept playing the conversation over in my mind. Had I been too harsh? Was there another way I could have handled it? But no matter how I looked at it, the truth remained. I had reached my breaking point. On the fourth day after the confrontation, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was Carla. "I'm sorry for how things went down. I don't want to leave things like this between us. Can we talk?" I hesitated before responding. I wasn't sure I was ready. The hurt from her behavior still stung, and the guilt I felt about the fallout was weighing heavily on me. But this was my sister, and deep down, I knew I couldn't let things end like this. We had to figure it out, one way or another. I typed back, trying to keep my words neutral. "Sure, let me know when you want to meet." She replied quickly. "How about tomorrow? I can come by in the afternoon." I nodded to myself, putting my phone down. The nervous energy in my chest was hard to ignore. What would I even say? What was there left to say? The next afternoon, Carla showed up at my door, looking smaller than I remembered. Her usual confident posture was gone, replaced by a quiet uncertainty. She held a bag of coffee in one hand, an offering I wasn't sure would make things right. "I brought coffee," she said awkwardly, holding it out to me. "It's from that place you like. I thought maybe it would help." I took the coffee, but the gesture didn't make the tension any less thick. "Thanks," I replied, stepping aside so she could come in. She looked around the apartment as if seeing it for the first time in days. The silence stretched out, neither of us sure how to begin. Finally, I broke the quiet. "So, what happened? Why didn't you just tell me you were struggling, Carla?" She sat down on the couch, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't want to bother you. I know you've got your own life, and I didn't want to seem like a mess, but I didn't realize how bad things were until it was too late. I didn't know how to fix it without making everything worse." I sat down beside her, trying to digest her words. "You are my family, Carla. I don't want to make things harder for you, but you can't just show up and expect everything to be fine. I love you, but you have to start taking responsibility. For yourself, for your actions, for the things you've put me through." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I know, I really do. I've been a mess, but I'm trying to get it together. I'm not perfect, and I make mistakes, but I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand." I paused for a moment, trying to figure out how I felt. On the one hand, I could see that she was genuinely remorseful, but on the other, I knew this cycle couldn't continue. We couldn't keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. "I just want things to be clear between us," I said, my voice softening. "I need you to respect my space, Carla. I need to know that I'm not constantly going to have to pick up the pieces when you fall apart. She wiped her eyes and nodded. I understand, and I'm sorry. I can't keep doing this to you. I won't ask to stay here again, not if it's going to hurt you. I'll figure something out. I promise. We sat there for a long while, talking through the things we hadn't said before, things we'd been too afraid to admit. I could feel the weight lifting slowly, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, but it felt like we were finally getting somewhere. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we might actually have a shot at fixing things. By the end of our conversation, we had reached a fragile understanding. Carla promised to start taking responsibility for herself, and I agreed to stop being the person who constantly cleaned up her messes. There were no grand declarations of change, no promises that everything would be perfect, but it was a start. It was a chance to rebuild our relationship, one that wasn't based on me acting as her safety net. I knew that things wouldn't change overnight, but at least we were both aware of the work we needed to do, both on ourselves and in our relationship. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, this could work. The next few days passed in a blur. Carla moved out of my place, back to Mom and Dad's, where she would figure things out. It wasn't ideal, but it was a step in the right direction. My home felt emptier, quieter, and strangely more peaceful. For the first time in weeks, I didn't have to worry about anyone else invading my space. But what came next was harder than I expected. It wasn't just about Carla, about her moving out or figuring things out. It was about me too, about how much I had let things slide, how much I had let myself be caught in a cycle of enabling her behavior. It wasn't just Carla who needed to change, it was me, too. I had spent so much time worrying about her that I had neglected my own needs, my own boundaries. I was learning slowly but surely that sometimes love meant drawing lines, even with family. The days following Carla's departure were oddly quiet. I had always loved the peaceful solitude of my apartment, but now it felt like something was missing. The emptiness wasn't just about the absence of Carla. It was the absence of the constant low-level tension that had become so familiar in the past few weeks. I didn't realize how much it had affected me until it was gone. For the first time in months, I was able to breathe without feeling like I was holding back. My routine returned to normal. I could come home to a clean apartment, cook dinner in peace, and relax without worrying that someone else's chaos would invade my personal space. But despite the relief, there was an uneasiness that lingered beneath the surface. I missed my sister, yes, but it wasn't just about her being gone. It was the fact that I hadn't truly dealt with everything we'd been through. We hadn't exactly solved our issues. We had patched things up, yes, but the cracks remained. One evening, a few weeks later, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. Carla wants to talk to you. She's been asking if you'd be willing to meet up. She says she wants to apologize. The text sent a jolt through me. I hadn't heard from Carla since she moved out, and I wasn't sure what kind of apology she had in mind. Was it a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or was she just feeling guilty? I sat there for a long time, the message unread on my phone. Part of me wanted to ignore it, pretend like everything was fine and that I didn't need to open old wounds. But another part of me knew that ignoring this conversation would only make things worse in the long run. I quickly typed back, "Sure, tell her I'll meet her tomorrow." The next afternoon, Carla showed up at the small cafe we had always frequented. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well. Her usual vibrant energy was subdued, and the way she sat slouched in her chair, hands nervously twisting around her coffee cup, told me that something was different. "Hey," she said softly when I approached. "Thanks for agreeing to meet." "Of course," I replied, trying to keep the tone light, but inside I was a ball of nerves. "What's going on? You wanted to talk." Carla took a deep breath and glanced down at her hands before looking up at me. I don't want things to be weird between us. I've been thinking a lot about everything, how I acted, how I made you feel. And I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I've been selfish, and I haven't been fair to you. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but it certainly wasn't this. The Carla I knew wouldn't have been this vulnerable, this humble. She wasn't someone who easily apologized, especially when she thought she was in the right. This was different. "Carla," I began, my voice softer now. "I appreciate that you're sorry, But we both know this isn't just about an apology. It's about respect. You can't just expect people to pick up the pieces every time things fall apart. I want to help you, but I can't keep being the one to fix everything for you. That's not fair to me. She nodded, her eyes welling up. I get it, and I know I've taken you for granted, always thinking you'd be there to fix it. I'm sorry for that. I've been in a really bad place for a while, and I didn't know how to ask for help without feeling like a failure. But I see now that I've hurt you in the process, and I don't want to keep doing that. The weight of her words settled between us, and for a moment, there was nothing left to say. We sat in the quiet of the cafe, the hum of conversations around us fading into the background as I processed what she had said. You're not a failure, Carla, I finally said, my voice steady. But you can't keep using me to avoid your own problems. I'll always be here for you, but I can't be your fallback every time things go wrong. She reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. I know. I'm done running away. I'm trying to figure things out on my own now. I won't make the same mistakes again. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in a long while. It wasn't that everything was suddenly okay. We had a long road ahead of us, and I didn't expect things to be perfect. But this felt like a turning point. For the first time in years, I felt like Carla was finally starting to take responsibility for her life, her actions, her choices, her future. I'm proud of you, I said quietly. But just remember, whatever happens, I'm still your sister, and I'll always want the best for you. But I need to look after myself too. She smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that I hadn't seen in a long time. I know, I'm going to do better, I promise. We left the cafe with a new understanding between us. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was progress. Carla had taken the first real step toward owning her actions, and I had taken the first step in letting go of the guilt I had been holding on to. The next few weeks passed without incident. Carla started working on her own projects, finding her own place, and slowly but surely rebuilding her life. It wasn't always easy, but I could see the changes in her. She wasn't the same person who had barged into my house, taking everything for granted. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important change of all. As for me, I had learned the importance of boundaries, of taking care of myself before I could take care of anyone else. I had learned that sometimes love meant letting go, even when it hurt. Things weren't perfect, and they never would be, but they were better, and that, for now, was enough. As the weeks went by, life began to find its rhythm again. The house felt more like my home than it had in a long time. The absence of Carla, while initially unsettling, became a quiet reminder that I could still live on my own terms. I was no longer walking on eggshells, no longer bracing myself for the next unexpected outburst or disruption. But as peaceful as the quiet was, there was still a sense of loss lingering in the background. It wasn't about Carla's absence. It was about the space she had occupied in my life, both physically and emotionally. For so long, I had defined myself by my role as the responsible one, the caretaker, the one who kept things together. Without her, I was left with questions about what it all meant. Who was I without all the weight of other people's problems hanging over me? In the time that had passed since our conversation at the cafe, I'd started to focus more on myself, on my career, my friendships, and, for the first time in years, my own personal happiness. I took up a hobby I had neglected for years, painting. I didn't expect to become a great artist, but the act of picking up a brush, of expressing myself without words, was therapeutic in ways I hadn't anticipated. It was a quiet, private joy that didn't require anyone's approval or validation. It was just mine. Yet even as I worked on rediscovering myself, I still thought about Carla. I wondered how she was doing. She had moved out and started working at a local coffee shop, something she had always been passionate about but never took seriously. She seemed to be finding her way again, and it brought me a sense of relief. She wasn't running away from her problems anymore. She was dealing with them head on. And though I wasn't there to pick up the pieces, I knew she had the strength to build her own life. One Saturday afternoon, a few weeks after our meeting, I received a message from Carla. Can I come by? I've been thinking a lot and I wanted to talk. I stared at the message for a few moments. There was no urgency, no signs of trouble in her words, but there was an unease in me nonetheless. I had worked so hard to rebuild my boundaries with her, and the idea of opening that door again filled me with a mixture of hope and apprehension. I replied, "Sure, let me know when." A couple of hours later, Carla was at my door again. She looked different this time. There was a quiet confidence about her, an energy that was unfamiliar but also reassuring. She wasn't the Carla who had barged into my home, demanding things without ever thinking about the consequences. She wasn't the Carla who had left a trail of destruction in her wake. No, this was a new version of her, one that I was cautiously optimistic about. "I've been meaning to talk to you," she began, as soon as I let her in, her voice steady. "I wanted to apologize again, this time for real. I know things haven't been easy between us, and I've said it before, but I need you to understand how sorry I am for the way I treated you." I nodded, silently acknowledging her words. It wasn't the first time she had apologized, but there was something different in the way she said it now. She wasn't just apologizing because she had to. She was doing it because she genuinely understood the weight of what she had put me through. "I've been working on myself," she continued, sitting down at the table. "I've been taking things more seriously. I'm saving up for my own place. I'm getting my act together, and I owe it to you to let you know that I'm not that same person anymore. I know I've been a burden in the past, but I'm not going to be that person again." I listened carefully, taking in her words. There was a part of me that still wanted to believe she could change, but another part of me, the part that had been hurt the most, was cautious. Change wasn't something that happened overnight. It took work, consistency, and effort. But the sincerity in her voice made me believe she was finally ready to try. "I'm proud of you," I said quietly. "I know it's been hard, but I'm glad to see you taking responsibility. But I need you to know that I'm still learning too. I'm learning to set boundaries, and I need you to respect those boundaries, just like I'm trying to respect yours. We're both figuring this out." Carla nodded, her face softening. "I understand. I've realized that it's not just about me. It's about you too. And I'm not going to keep making the same mistakes." We sat there for a long time, talking about everything and nothing. We didn't solve everything in that conversation, but it felt like a turning point. We weren't just two people who had been living in the same space. We were two individuals who were finally learning how to exist in the same world, without stepping on each other's toes. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. A few weeks later, Carla moved into her own apartment. I helped her with the move, and for the first time in a long while, we were able to support each other without any hidden resentment. I saw the changes in her, the way she carried herself with a new sense of responsibility. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to rescue her. I knew she was going to be okay on her own. Things between us weren't perfect. There would always be challenges, always moments where we would have to navigate the complexities of being family. But I no longer felt like I was carrying the weight of her problems on my shoulders. And in return, I was learning to let go of the guilt that had kept me tethered to her struggles for so long. Our relationship was different now. It was still growing, still evolving, but it felt healthier, more balanced. We both understood the importance of boundaries. We both knew that love didn't mean sacrificing ourselves. Love meant supporting each other while still maintaining our own identities. And in that, I found peace. The months that followed felt like a slow but steady progression toward healing, both for Carla and for me. We had our moments, of course. Family is complicated, and no matter how much time passes, the patterns we've grown up with don't just disappear. But we both worked hard to make sure that the new foundation we had built was one of mutual respect, understanding, and most importantly, personal growth. Carla thrived in her new apartment. It wasn't perfect. She had a lot to learn about responsibility and managing her finances, but she was doing it. She had a steady job at the coffee shop, and every time I visited her place, I saw the small but meaningful changes. Her space was cozy, her room was tidy, and she had plans for the future. It wasn't the glamorous life she had imagined for herself when we were younger, but it was hers, and she was proud of it. As for me, I kept moving forward too. I had learned a lot about myself through this whole experience. The biggest lesson I took away from everything was how much I had neglected my own needs in the name of family. For so long, I had defined myself by my ability to fix everyone else's problems, to play the role of the caretaker. I'd forgotten that I couldn't pour from an empty cup, that sometimes the most loving thing I could do for others was to take care of myself first. I started focusing more on my career, taking on new projects that excited me. I wasn't just working to pay the bills anymore. I was working because I had passion and purpose. My evenings were spent with friends, painting, and exploring new hobbies. I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. And then, one evening, I ran into Gabriel. It had been months since I had last seen him. He was the man who had once been part of Carla's world, but we had lost touch after everything. When I saw him across the street, I recognized him immediately. He was walking toward me with that same friendly smile, the one that always put you at ease. "Millie," he called, waving as he approached. "Long time no see." I smiled, my heart lightening at the sight of him. We had been through a lot over the years, ups, downs, and everything in between, but we had both come out the other side stronger. "Hey, Gabriel," I said, stopping in front of him. "It's been too long," he chuckled, adjusting his jacket. "Tell me about it. I was just thinking about you the other day. How's everything been? How's Carla?" I paused, a warm feeling spreading in my chest. It's been better. Carla's doing really well. She's found her footing, finally." "That's great to hear," Gabriel said, his eyes softening. "You two have been through a lot, huh?" I nodded. "Yeah, we have. But it's okay. We're okay." We talked for a while longer, catching up on life, sharing stories of what we'd been doing. It felt natural, easy, like reconnecting with an old friend. When we parted ways, he gave me a warm hug, and I felt the familiar, comforting sense of closure that had taken me so long to find. It was in that moment that I realized how much I had changed, not just in terms of how I saw Carla or my family, but how I saw myself. I had learned to stand firm in my own life, to set boundaries, and to prioritize my own happiness. I had let go of the past, of old patterns, and embraced the person I had become. A few weeks later, Carla called me out of the blue. "I've got some news," she said, her voice excited. "I signed a lease for a new place. It's a small studio, but it's mine. I'm really doing it, Millie. I'm on my own." I could hear the pride in her voice, and it made my heart swell. "That's amazing, Carla. I'm really proud of you." "I know we've had our issues," she continued, her voice softer now. "But I just want you to know how much I appreciate you. You've always been there for me, and even when I didn't deserve it, you never gave up on me. I'm trying to be better, I promise." I felt a lump in my throat as I replied, "You don't have to promise me anything. You're already doing it. I'm proud of you, more than you know." As I hung up the phone, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, taking it all in. The weight of everything we had been through, the years of tension, the struggle, the setbacks, had finally given way to something better. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was progress. I looked around my apartment, my space, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel empty. It felt full, full of possibility, full of life, and full of love. Love for myself, love for the people I cared about, and love for the journey we all were on.